Well, you asked for it and you got it. And I've a funny feeling you probably won't be asking for it again. This week, it's just us.
This is Partners in Crime with Adam Croft and Robert Dawes.
Well, I won't say the demand was overwhelming, but we had quite a few people suggesting that we should interview each other for this podcast.
Well, just enough people contacted us and said after last week's podcast, and someone had said, well, a few people have said, why don't you talk about yourselves? We want to know a bit more about you.
Well, you don't need asking twice to talk about ourselves.
Well, luckily I got 3 emails, all from my mother, and I know better than to actually deny her the dubious pleasure of listening to me babbling on. But yes, well, actually, in fairness, let's put this right. We were going to have a week off, listeners, throughout the world. We were going to give you a break. We've sabotaged that particular effort, or it has been sabotaged, and we've decided to fill that with a little conversation between ourselves, talking about where we came from, why we do what we do, a little bit about our books, and whatever else takes our fancy.
Well, let's be honest, we were going to have a week off, but we decided we probably should do a podcast, but we just couldn't be bothered to book a guest. That's the reality of it.
That is the reality. You are going away on a stag do for 4 days, don't forget.
Well, yeah, yes. But more on that later. Or perhaps not. But yeah, we did a video, didn't we, a couple of years back?
Yes.
Conversations in Crime, which I think is on YouTube still. We basically discussed what it's like to be a crime writer, and we talked about our books and the general working patterns that we have, and that was really interesting. That was kind of the precursor to this podcast in the first place. So it's nice to be revisiting the subject matter again a couple of years on, and giving an updated account of ourselves, I suppose.
Yeah, well, there we are. We'll see how what response we get. Hopefully it'll be positive. I'm not necessarily expecting that. But before we go on about ourselves...
Let's not break the format too much.
Let's not break the format. It's not all me, us. This week, as most people in the UK know, we have the return of The Bridge. Yes, it is back, and our favourite heroine, Saga Noran, will be on another investigation. This has been one of my favourite, well, not just me, of course, many millions of people have found this an extraordinary journey with this character over this will be the 4th series, as I say, and it's been absolutely it's influenced so many other dramas that have come after it.
Well, The Tunnel primarily.
The Tunnel, yes, which is the British version of it, and I have to say, I've said it before on the podcast, I think The Tunnel has worked very, very well because it's stuck to the original story, but it's actually brought so many other things into it as well. I didn't think I'd be able to watch The Tunnel after watching The Bridge, but I did, and they both work very well.
Does it work better if you watch The Bridge first? Because I've not seen The Bridge. I did watch The Tunnel and didn't quite get into it.
Well, yes, I would have thought so. I mean, that's the way I've done it, so that's the way I'd sort of recommend it.
I'll try that myself.
But, I mean, it's interesting listening to the creator and executive producer of The Bridge, who's a gentleman called Anders Landstrom, and he said this week, it's obviously very sad to say goodbye to Saga after 4 incredible seasons, but our talented writers, Hans and Camilla, have an extraordinary end in store for viewers. Sophia has played the role of Saga with a rawness and truth rarely seen on screen. I concur with that. And it's been a pleasure to work with her. Hans Rosenfeld, who also writes the ITV crime series, the excellent Marcella, starring Anna Frail, says, we've been on an amazing journey with Saga Noran and Heinrich Sabro and felt that there was one last thrilling story to tell. Set 2 years on from the last series, Saga is coming to terms with the dire consequences of being accused of her mother's murder when a macabre crime seemingly linked to migration takes place. Meanwhile, Heinrich continues his desperate search for his children. So there we are. This is coming to the BBC on, well, tonight on Friday. So tune in. It's on BBC Two, not as it is usually premiered on BBC4. And this is the first time I think that the series actually has aired first, premiered in Sweden. Usually it's been on the BBC. Maybe I'm right, maybe I'm wrong. Someone will no doubt message us and tell me that. But for lovers of the bridge, this is a very exciting week. I will be glued to it over the next a few weeks, and no adverts. Just sit there and enjoy the whole thing.
The beauty of the licence fee.
Da, 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 da.
Is that the theme tune, or have you just gone off on one?
I've just gone off on one.
So, anything else you've been watching or reading this week? You've bought copies of your own books.
Well,
I see.
Yes, well, it's only I can remember what.
I was going to say you haven't been reading those.
What's in them? I've been reading a couple of other books. Well, I mean, as we're going to be talking about ourselves a little bit, and my books are set in foreign climes. I thought I might quickly recommend two reads to terrific authors who also write their stories abroad from our point of view. The first one, Dion Meyer, writes about his own country, which is South Africa. I've read.
That is a stunning cover. Sorry to jump in there.
Yes, it is very good.
Blue
isn't
on
it?
the spine. Look that book up, really.
It
It's
is.
for the cover. Dion Meyer,
Dion Meyer, 7 Days, and he was recommended to me by a writer who's been approached to do some work, I think, on some adaptation of one of his works, and I can fully understand why. Yes, I mean he sets his stories in South Africa, as I say, and I suppose one of the best ways to say what it's like is the Independent Review said there is no gainsaying the sheer momentum of the storytelling, and there is a key thing to praise in 7 Days. How does Meyer manage to make the hoariest cliche of crime fiction, the alcoholic copper, read as if we've never encountered this device? And he does, quite superbly. So the one I've just read is 7 Days. When the South African Police Services receive this email, it says, "I'll shoot a policeman every day until you arrest the murderer of Hanneke Slowett."
Wow.
And another policeman is shot. Their problem is that they don't know who murdered the sensual and ambitious lawyer Slowett. So recovering alcoholic Benny Graysoll is ordered to reopen the case. And he does, in his own particular and extraordinary way. It's a terrific read. You're in this extraordinary country. Our South African listeners will know only too well what an extraordinary place it is. But for people who like their crime fiction set in another country, like I very often do, that's one to read.
Going on the list.
And also a shout out for the UK author James Sylvester, whose books Escape to Perdition was his first book, which is set in Prague.
I happen to know he's a keen listener to the podcast as well, James.
Is he?
Yes,
Well,
he
they
gets
are.
in touch
Well,
on
James,
Twitter and,
there we are. That's a happy coincidence. Escape to Perdition was his first book. The Prague Ultimatum is his second book. The terrific reads. The first one set in Prague in 2015. Herbert Biley, aged hero of the Prague Spring, stands on the brink of an historic victory, poised to reunite the Czech and Slavic. Let's get this right. Poised to reunite. Get my teeth in. The Czech and Slovak republics 26 years after the Velvet Revolution. The imminent elections are the final stage in realising his dream, but other parties have their own plans for the fate of the region. A shadowy collective will stop at nothing to preserve the status quo. It's a terrific ride. Again, the description of Prague is... You really are there. It's a wonderful city, as anyone who's been there will know, and it's a great read by a terrific writer, available on Kobo, James Sylvester, Escape to Perdition, or The Prague Ultimatum.
I'm certainly going to get that. I love Prague. I've never been to South Africa, but I would absolutely love to. So they're both going on my list, and you're costing me money this week, Bob, because again, as most people I'm sure will be able to identify with, buying more books than I've got any time to read.
Well, yes, I mean, that is the thing. I mean, if you love reading as much as we do, but also you've got to get a balance between actually writing one's own books and also sort of being inspired and having wonderful journeys through the words and stories and characters of other writers.
Well, both of those books are available on Kobo. It's 7 Days was the first one. You've hidden the books away now, so I've got to pretend that I've remembered the titles. And
the Prague Ultimatum.
No, it wasn't called that.
It was, wasn't it?
No.
Yes, it was.
No. That's your one for next week.
Oh, no, it is.
Yeah.
He has got the Prague. It is the Prague Ultimatum. His first one is Escape to Perdition.
Escape to Perdition by James Sylvester, and 7 Days was by Dion. Yeah, not Dion Dublin. He does Dion Mayer.
Dion Mayer.
That's the one. Not Dion Dublin from Homes Under the Hammer.
Is that Dion?
He's played the Coventry City.
I think his book was sort of redecorated in 7 Days. Dion Mayer is just called 7 Days.
They're both wonderful. Go and get them on Kobo. You don't need a special device or an e-reader or anything of that sort. Whatever you're listening to us on now, you can read the books on. And what's more, you get 90% off if you haven't bought a book from Kobo before. Go to kobo.com, find whichever book you'd like to read. We recommend those two this week. Enter the promo code CRIME at the checkout, and the lovely folks at Kobo will give you 90% off. I can't really contribute anything, I'm afraid. I've not had any time to read or watch anything this week, mainly because I've been doing the edits on my new book, which is out at the end of May.
And what is that called?
Dead and Buried. That's the 8th Night in Culver House crime thriller.
It says here to ask him. Okay, let's get back to this series of books. I mean, you have 3 series of books, Adam, and that was your first series.
Yes.
So, of all of them, which do you prefer, if any? Do you have a favoured child?
I like them all for different reasons, really. The Night in Culver House books, which this is a new version, a new edition of. This is the 8th one. I like those because there's lots of storylines there. There's lots of ongoing character arcs and things going on in that world that I've created, which makes it a little easier to write books going forward. It kind of gets easier as you go along because the world opens up and more stories and ideas come to you, and they sell pretty well. I've got the Kempston Hardwick mysteries,
You
which
certainly
are traditional Golden Age style with a very humorous, tongue-in-cheek kind of look at the Golden Age, but set in the modern day. They're lots of fun to write. I really like those, but they don't sell as well. And the psychological thrillers, which something I kind of fell into accidentally, which sell extraordinarily well. So I like them all for different reasons.
Well, I mean, that's such an incredible range of writers. I mean, for an awful lot of crime writers, it's all they can do to hang on to their original conceits and start a series and continue writing in the series if that series chooses to be popular. But you have 3 series, as you say, all of them popular. No matter what you say about Kingston, I mean, it still sells well. Kempston. Did I say Kingston?
That's how popular it is.
Yes, that's it. I knew it began with K.
You played him in an audio dramatisation.
Did I?
You didn't remember his name.
Yes, of course I do. But I mean, and they're great reads, as you say. They're sort of Golden Age. They're sort of a homage to the Golden Age of your Agatha Christie and let's reveal all in the library at the end of the book.
Yeah, they're a deliberate tongue-in-cheek.
Well, there's a lot of humour runs through them, and they were certainly great fun to do.
They're like Jonathan Creek, I kind of liken them to.
Yes.
And they don't take themselves too seriously. There's definitely a comedy edge. And it just sort of silliness, really, and playing around with, unashamedly the old tropes, kind of not ripping off, but doing a tongue-in-cheek look at the Holmes and Watson kind of thing, and the Poirot reveal at the end, and lots of very recognisable tropes that I like to.
Well, I mean, they're terrific reads, and they were certainly great to put on audio. The chap playing Kempston was sort of okay, I think, but everyone else seemed to be.
He was cheap.
Yes, oh yes, always ready for a part. So your new book is back to your first nitty-gritty police procedural murder investigations. Has it been happy returning to them?
Yes and no. Yeah, it's a very difficult book to write, actually. It took me a lot longer than books normally do. I mean, normally once I've got the plan there, because I plan so heavily, once I sit down and start writing, I can normally get the first draft done inside a month. But this one was about 5 months, going on for 6 months. it was
Right.
it was yeah it was heavy going and tough in lots of ways, but managed to get to the end. I don't give up. So yeah, I was hoping it would have been out probably just after Christmas time, but yeah, it wasn't.
Okay, and what's the publishing date for that?
30th of May.
30th of
Currently available for pre-order at Kobo. Use
right.
your crime discount code.
Oh, yes, well done. It says to say here. So I mean, there we are. But also, your route into writing is being very particular. Most of our guests on our podcast work with publishers and are published by publishers. I am myself. But you have stuck to the independent route.
Mostly,
with one very successful sojourn out of that. And also, not only that, you've actually been sort of a major spokesman for the independent writing world, actually just explaining how to go about it, the pros and the cons, and what it takes to actually become a best-selling independent writer in a hugely competitive market. So, and it's something that you continue to do. So I take it, if it ain't broke, why fix it?
Well, exactly. Yeah, I mean, there's no other way I'd have been able to release 20 odd titles in 7 years. It just wouldn't have been possible. Most publishers don't work to those timescales. They want a book a year. There are publishers these days who do work to the more modern timescales and get 3 or 4 out a year per writer. But it just works for me. You know, I got on the train quite early, I suppose, with the independent publishing thing, and I've built a big following, and they're just, I mean, in the last year or two, the number of publishing deals I've turned down is crazy.
Oh, I know.
There's no, you know, it's a huge honour every time someone comes to me and offers something, but there's just nothing that can really match up to what I get publishing independently. Really, it's, you know, I've got direct access to all of the readers. I can you know, strike up conversations and have direct contact with them, you know, throughout the week. I can get a book out very, very quickly. I've got control over cover designs and commissioning those myself, and over the editors that are used.
Timescales.
Over timescales and get to keep most of the money. Yeah, I mean, there's just no kind of downside to it, really. It's a lot more work. I work, you know, very long hours, but yeah, for me, that the main thing is that the end product and the quality of the end product is exactly the same, and that a reader wouldn't tell the difference between an independently published book and a traditionally published one. That's always been my focus, I suppose. The cover designer that I use has done cover designs for Stephen King, John le Carré. He's one of the best in the business, and his price is Stuart Bache. Yes, he's a wonderful designer, and a lovely guy too. You know, my editors works for big publishing houses, so, you know, we're using the same people as the traditional publishers. So essentially, I am the author and the publisher, rather than just the author publishing his own books.
But as you say, it takes an incredible amount of dedication and work, because most people, including myself, it's all you can do to channel your energy into writing the book in the first place. I do look after a little bit of my work in ebooks. I sort of manage that, but it's so time consuming, and especially as a major part of any writer's work is now not only writing the books, but it's actually marketing them, personal appearances, all these sort of things. So, I mean, and not only that, you run every area of your writing business, and I know you're hugely dedicated, massively hard working,
and my wife Jo as well. I have to say, we both
Jo
work full time actually on this. She works and does a lot of my kind of back office stuff and sort of accounts and promotions and a lot of the admin stuff, which helps enormously.
So, well, there you are, and you're in a position to do that. Now, here's a question: do you find, certainly in the early days of indie writers, there was a great deal of sort of prejudice against them, a sort of almost snobbishness in the world. I mean, do you find that still holds? Are successful independent indie writers accepted by?
I think there's bit of it. There's a little bit of snobbishness still there. I mean, there always will be. You know,
Yes.
there are still people out there who think the Earth is flat, and people who think that Elvis Presley's still alive. So you know,
Wait. You mean he's not?
so there will always be people who will be kind of burying their heads in the sand. And they kind of they remind me of remember when the Iraq War was kicking off, and they had Comical Ali, who was standing on top of the building in Baghdad saying, "No, there's nothing to worry about. There are no American tanks in Baghdad." As you could see the tanks rolling in behind him. That's kind of a lot of the kind of the major publishers sometimes remind me of that. You know, the few that still haven't quite cottoned on. But you know, independently published books now account for the majority of books sold in the UK and around the world, and most of the money that goes through the industry as well is now in the independent sphere. But it's not for everyone. I think a lot of writers don't want to do the 60-odd hour weeks that I do, and you know, I don't blame them. A lot of people just want to write a book and email it off and have somebody else do the donkey work, and that's a hugely appealing thing. And you know, not everybody wants to run a business as well as write.
Well, and I'm sort of in that camp, I have to say, you know, and I'm full of genuine admiration for you and the way you do it. But I suppose it's each to their own. At the end of it all, you need a good book, and that's the telling thing. You're only a successful indie writer if people buy your work. You're only a successful published writer if people buy your work. So at that point, it amounts to pretty much the same thing.
Yeah, as long as the readers enjoy the books and can't tell the difference, then that's the main thing. As long as we're not compromising on quality in any area, and the readers are still enjoying it, you know, what does it matter what happens in between? I think there's room for everyone. But yeah, you've kind of gone the hybrid route as well, haven't you? Yours was quite an odd one because your paperbacks were done by Urbane, weren't they?
Yes.
And the ebooks of the same books, I think you managed to retain control of those.
I've looked after myself in that respect, and
which I've not known before. That's quite an odd, especially with the same title. You're having kind of control over different formats.
Oh well, yes. Well, I mean, I think Urbane has sort of set up a slightly different model. I mean, lots of publishers are setting up different models, really, to see what works. And my first two books, The Rock and the Poison Rock, are published by Urbane. My third one will be published elsewhere. But yes, I wanted to keep hold of the ebook part of the business. I mean, partly because, you know, being friends with you, and partly because I enjoy it. I enjoy that sort of world. So I do feel that I've got dipping a toe, more than a toe, an entire fist and foot actually, into the business side of it. And as regards the traditional publishing side of the paperback and hardback, that goes to a traditional publisher. But, you know, whatever route you take, it's a question of actually getting the books out there, getting them marketed, getting them bought, and, you know, getting them read, and making sure they're the best they can possibly be. Yeah, you know, and my route into it was quite interesting. Someone asked me at a festival, you know, where did I start? And I sort of started with plays, really. I can remember I was running a company in the New End Theatre in Hampstead back in the 1980s, when you were just a little glint in someone's eye.
Well, it depends which end of the 80s we're talking about.
Yes, the 1880s. And we had been asked to actually do one of the first performances at the newly, soon-to-be opened Theatre Museum, alas, no longer there in Covent Garden. And we were doing a one-act American play, and we needed to find another play sort of to match it. And so I sat down and I wrote a play called Out to Lunch. It was performed, and from that I got a literary agent as a writer of plays. It is a literary agency that I'm still with, you know, all these years later. So it's been that was.
They still think there's a chance, do they?
They still think there's a chance. Wow. The play hasn't been done actually, but again, which is probably just as well. But that sort of got me writing, so I dabbled in that sort of thing. But certainly, The Rock was born out of I'd done a detective series co-created a detective series for Radio 4 called Truman and Riley, which had done rather well and run for a few years. And as a result of that, I got commissioned by ITV to do a script for a potential, new crime series, which I set about with earnest, and came up with a story set in Yorkshire. Anyway, 2 years later, suddenly nothing happened, as they say, which is very often the way in the television world, as any one in it, or certainly any writer or publisher or agent will tell you. It didn't get done for all sorts of reasons, most of which I know and some of which I don't. Anyway, so for a few years I had this script, and I thought, this is good. This is an interesting story. I quite enjoyed writing that, and I then bumped into you, I seem to recall, and you were saying I'm writing these books
in the pub.
In the pub. Was it in the pub? I can't imagine that would be the case. And I turned it into a novella with one big shift. I didn't want to set it in Yorkshire anymore. I set it in Gibraltar, the Rock of Gibraltar. It was a place that I'd been going to for years and I knew a lot about. And I thought it was absolutely ideal. And the story would sort of transpose very well into Gibraltar. It has the second oldest police force in the world, modelled after the original London police force and Met, and of course is sort of a British sovereign territory governed entirely by the Gibraltarians. And of course the police force follows exactly the same form as it does in the UK. So that's how it started, and I started the first one, and my second one, The Poison Rock, which is again set in Gibraltar, drawing on the past, spies from the Second World War, all based on a certain amount of fact, I have to say, and the shooting of a Hollywood film in the town. They have had Hollywood films filmed there. They've had Bond films filmed there, so all that was drawn on things that had sort of happened before, and it follows the life of Detective Sergeant Tamara Sullivan and Chief Inspector Gus Broderick of the Royal Gibraltar Police Force, and I'm currently on my third, called The Killing Rock.
I've got to say, it's been quite interesting watching the Rock series develop, because I remember when we first started speaking all those years ago, probably 7 years ago.
Yeah.
It was at that stage where you had this TV series that you'd written, and it was kind of sitting there waiting to be something to be done with it, and you said you wanted to turn it into a book series, and we I remember we sort of sat down, we went through the scripts, and we tried to kind of restructure it in novel form.
Absolutely, and you helped me tremendously in that, because how many books had you published by then? You must have had 3 or 4 out by then.
Probably by then, yeah.
So you were more than in your stride, and you'd sort of had moved from marketing. Well, you were still doing some marketing. Your day job. You hadn't sold your ladders at that point, as you do now. And this is the day before 1.5 million copies of your books had been read. And so that was that was very inspiring. And remains.
But it was great fun, because it's not only just having an idea and that being turned into a book, but having the whole story there in a different format. And the adaptations. That's why I'm always fascinated by people we speak to on the podcast who adapt books for TV and vice versa, because a lot of people I think readers and viewers of TV series think it's quite an easy thing to adapt from one format to the other. You just write it in prose, or you just show the novel on the screen, and it's hard to describe without getting into the technical detail, but it just doesn't work like that, does it? And there's lots of things. Books do have to be changed for TV. There are certain things that didn't happen in the book, and there's always a really good reason for it. And if it was shown as happened in the book, it just wouldn't work for the flow of TV.
Well, they're completely different mediums and completely disciplines involved, and of course one is the written word and you use your imagination, and on the screen of course it's presented to you in pictures and characters and what have you, so it's a very different way of storytelling. And as we with Rick Cotton last week talking about Wallander and his adaptation of that, it's a huge challenge to present that world. I mean, not on a crime level. I can remember years ago when I started doing Jeeves and Wooster, Stephen Fry and Hugh Laurie were just saying what a monumental challenge they felt it was when they were first approached to play those characters by P.G. Wodehouse, and what a responsibility they felt to it. Luckily they had a great writer and adapter, but it doesn't please everyone. You can't win. There are people who will watch Morse on television and say, well, I prefer the books, and why have they done this, and why have they done this? Or people who will look at Wallander or any major adaptation, or Poirot, or what have you. There will be core loyal readers who will just say, no, I'm sorry, I'm going to stick with the books. That's not how I imagine this world to be. That is not how I imagine the character to look and talk, and I'm not interested.
But it's such a difficult thing to do. I mean, as well as the
huge
books,
skill.
I mean, as you know, I'm a published and performed playwright as well, which is something I tend to keep quiet because it's completely different to my crime fiction stuff. And you said yourself numerous times, other people have, why don't you adapt your books for the stage? Because then I've got extra plays out there, and I've had a look at it and I've tried, and it's. There's one book I think I've written out of the 20 odd that I think might possibly work on the stage, and even then I've really not got far in terms of actually adapting it. It's just really, really difficult, and I completely admire anyone who can do that, because turning a book into a play or into a TV screenplay might sound as if it's easier because you've got all the material there.
Yeah.
Actually, it's not. It's 100 times harder than it is just coming up with something new that already works for that format. It's like trying to get a square peg into a round hole.
Oh, again, it's very, very difficult. And you're absolutely right. I mean, maybe we should do a special on this, actually, because we touched on it with our interview with Peter James, who has had his books adapted for the stage very successfully. But it is very, very difficult to do. I mean, Agatha Christie did her own predominantly, I think.
And even they weren't very good.
But they're still out there. They still get big audiences.
Absolutely.
It's sort of...
But compared to the books, it just goes to show you what a tough discipline it is to adapt and write things for the stage.
Again, you come back to the simple. You take something out of its original medium, something it was created for, and try and transpose it into something else. It has great difficulties, and it may not please everyone, but it's more successful, surprisingly enough, than not. But the stage is quite interesting because there's a huge demand, we know, for crime fiction on television and murder stories and what have you, even in films. And there is a big audience for it on the stage. Certainly out of London, out of the main metropolitan areas in the UK, and I'm not sure whether it's the same in the States and Canada and Australia and many other areas, but it struggles as a medium to succeed. Let's take the example in London. I mean, we have the longest running murder mystery, The Mousetrap, Dame Agatha's play, which has been running since 46 or 47. I mean, and will run for forever. Still gets an audience, people who want to go and see it. But outside of that, the genre, as much as it has exploded upon the small screen and in many different forms, has sort of shrunk when it comes to the West End and indeed Broadway, and they're very rarely revived.
Which is bizarre because it's now crime and thrillers. Recently was announced a few weeks back is that it's the biggest genre. It's overtaken all other genres now. It's more widely read than romance than everything else. So I think it's so underrepresented, isn't it, on the stage?
Well, we're clearly asking more questions than we can answer, and that's why I think we should actually come back to this and get a few people who do adapt thrillers.
And we should write some crime thriller plays as well. We should get on that while the topic's hot. Maybe we shouldn't include that bit in the episode. Maybe
I don't think we should threaten our listeners with that.
Maybe keep our powder dry.
But yeah, okay. I mean, that's quite interesting. But there we are. I mean, two different writers for those. This episode should be called "Be Careful What You Wish For," because those of you who wanted to find out a bit more about our books and how we go about them may be regretting asking now.
Hovering over the unsubscribe button as we speak.
Well, yes, well, I do hope not. But there you are. But that's it. We both write crime novels. We both write different crime novels in different ways. We both have a different work ethic. You have one of the most disciplined work ethics I've ever seen. You sit down and you write. I managed to write in between all sorts of things. I can remember doing my exams at school, and I used to love a little interruption. And in my house with children and various other, you can't, and I sort of embrace that. So I have a very strange working. I write where and when I can.
Yeah.
And so it tends to be a slightly slower process. But it is something I love. And we've talked to many of our guests before about how they get lost in different worlds. I mean, yesterday I was sort of lost. I was in, where was I? I was in Gibraltar, no surprise. There I was.
You got back quick.
I was in Marina Bay, and I was writing a scene set at a local cafe there, and another scene about someone following someone else down an Irish town in the centre of Gibraltar. And then I was across in Spain where a body had been discovered, and the local police force had been called, and one of my main protagonists were there. And at the end of that, it was sort of, I'd done those 2 chapters. I sat back and I went, gosh, right, I'm going to go and earth myself. I'm going to sit in the garden because it's beautiful weather here at the moment. And sat there and had a cup of tea and I just relaxed. And yet my mind was still roaming, for the next chapter where it's going to be said. Is it going to be in Tangier, across the Straits? Is it going to be over here? I mean, I have a pattern which I follow.
Do you plan ahead then? Do you know where you're going?
I do, yes. I mean, I know the arc of a book. I know where it starts. I've got an idea where I hope it to be in the middle, and I know where it's going to end.
You don't have each chapter kind of planned out before?
Yes, well, I sort of have a loose idea of what needs to be covered, where the character's journey needs to go, what needs to happen. But again, you don't know until you jump in and start writing it, where that's going to take you. No. And therefore it is a form of improvisation, writing, because you with the best sort of planning in the world, you start to write or whatever, and then all of a sudden, something takes over, and there is as you say, it's like a jazz musician jamming or something like that. You may go off, or you may discover things that you didn't realise.
A little solo in the middle.
Yes, a little flugelhorn solo takes off, and you go, that's quite nice. And you never intended that to happen, but it takes place, and it may subtly shift, or sometimes, occasionally, greatly shift where you are going. So you've got to be open to the process of change, even if you've got a fairly strong plan of how you want the book to go and what you want your characters and the situations to be. But
I've had major characters that have come into my Night in Coal House series, in particular in the first book, a character who wasn't planned, and I planned that first book fairly heavily. And in about the 3rd chapter, I think it was, this character just crept in. Who wasn't intended, and I thought, he's quite good. I can see that he would add something to the series, and he was in it for the next couple of books until I got sick of him and killed him off.
So basically, you can be stalked by imaginary characters that won't stop stalking you.
Well, yeah,
until you actually have to sort of just welcome them in and say, have a cup of tea, stop the stalking. Are you staying or are you going?
Well, I killed him off in the 3rd book.
Oh, right.
He was starting to get a bit big for his boots, considering he wasn't ever intended to be there. So,
well, as I know, as crime writers, killing someone off doesn't necessarily mean they've actually died.
Oh no, his legacy certainly lives on through the rest of the series.
I know who you're talking about now.
Yeah.
Sorry.
But it's strange how those things happen, isn't it? And even when you plan things as heavily as I do, to the point where, I never sit down and go, chapter 1, I don't know what's going to happen. I've always got my beats for each chapter, and I know what I'm going to be writing. But even then, that doesn't make it easy. This last book that I just finished writing, Dead and Buried, I had it completely planned out. I knew exactly where I was going. But even though I sat there and I'd go, right, it's chapter 26 today. This is what happens. This is where it needs to go. I was still sitting there trying to get the words out, and it just wasn't happening. Just wasn't happening. It was a real slog to get it finished, and I was quite worried that it wasn't going to be any good, and I wasn't keen on it myself. But when it went out to editors and to initial readers, the feedback has been very, very positive, actually. So I'm very pleased, and just goes to show, what do I know? All the books that I thought weren't any good have actually proved to be the best ones and the biggest sellers.
Well, isn't that strange that you don't know? You put your wares on the market stall in the hope that they'll all sell, but it's very often a surprise which products actually get taken up and become popular. Another thing about writing, which is I always find interesting, we've touched on it with our guests as well, is this: you spend so much time in an imaginary world, and this is something I talk about, at literary festivals and various other things, and it came from a friend of mine, a writer friend of mine, Christopher Matthew, who said that 80% of maybe more. There are no scientific statistics on this, I have to add. Is spent thinking, and thinking very hard. Now, to anyone looking at a writer working, thinking, it just looks as if you're sitting around all day doing not a lot at all, because they're not really impressed until steam is coming out of your ears and your fingers are tapping away hard at the QWERTY. That's what most people think writing is. And of course, an awful lot of writing is thinking, working it out. I mean, this is why
can you tell my wife this? Yeah, so when I'm just sitting there in the garden staring off into space, can you tell her that I am actually working?
Yeah, he's not sunbathing.
Well, I am sunbathing, but I'm thinking about stuff at the same time.
He's streamlining, he's self-editing, he's working very, very hard. It looks like he's having a nice afternoon in the garden in the sunshine. It's not. It's the white heat of creativity pumping away between his two ears.
That's it.
Shall I leave her a note?
That'll do, yeah. I'll just take that little bit of audio out there and put that on a loop in the house.
So anyone who lives with a writer doesn't maybe quite understand the process, may be a little bit forgiving. Unfortunately, of course, in saying that, sometimes I do just pass out in the garden.
Well, she used to be a teacher.
With the ombre solaire on my face.
She used to be a teacher, and I put up with living with a teacher for 6 or 7 years.
She's a wonderful woman.
She is, absolutely, yes. But we both know what it's like to live with a spouse who has a very awkward, demanding / unconventional job.
So here's one more question. It's you write your books in different areas. You've Kempston Hardwick in this country, sort of 1 foot in the past, although it's set in the modern day. You have your Culver House, which is gritty, tough police procedural investigations, set actually again locally and contemporary. And then you have your individual standalone psychological thrillers. So you have 3 different worlds, and within those worlds you actually set your books in worlds within worlds. People ask me, why did I choose Gibraltar? And I have a very simple answer to that. If you're going to spend an awful lot of time in your mind thinking, writing these books, I want to be somewhere that I enjoy. I don't necessarily want to be in a multi-storey car park in Sheffield. No disrespect to the multi-storey car park in Sheffield. Sheffield's a wonderful city and a great place. It's just I'm not particularly drawn to writing or setting my books there. I do like setting my books in the Mediterranean, in the sun, somewhere that I like, somewhere that if I'm going to be spending hours inside my head every day being, I enjoy being myself personally. Is that selfish? I don't know, but that's what inspires me.
I've not tried it. That's something I'd like to do, actually. Something I did
go on a holiday with your next book.
Well, I did one book that was
Agatha
set on a fictional Greek island. Death Under the Sun was set on a fictional Greek island, and that was good fun. I quite liked writing that one for that reason. So yeah, maybe I'll do something set abroad. Yeah, but
I hope that doesn't sound shallow. But it was one of the reasons I wanted to do it. I suppose it follows my reading taste as well. I love a British crime drama, but I always like to balance it out with a book set in Atlanta or LA, or a book set in in the Far East to take me to places that I mean, it's just a personal preference, I guess.
Well, mine are certain fictionalised versions of the local area, really. Fictionalised versions because landlords don't really like it when you kill people off in their pubs. It's not good for business. And B, it allows me to play fast and loose as well, because there was a bit, I think it was like the 4th or the 5th Night in Culver House book, where I've got in my head exactly where these things are happening on the physical real world map, and then things are basically renamed. And I thought, I've got to get this character from here to there within the space of 5 minutes, but that's actually a 20-minute drive.
Yes.
I was thinking, how can I do this? I went back and I thought, I've got to change things that happen earlier on to allow this to happen this way. And then I thought, well, hang on. Nobody knows that's a 20-minute drive. It's a real place, but I've renamed it. I don't draw a map in the back of the book.
It's your world. You have total power over it.
Who says I can't bring that town closer to this town?
Yes.
So I did.
Instant bypass.
And it just it allows you that freedom, because nobody's going to go, oh, well, that place is actually a 20-minute drive away. They don't know that. It's a town that, to all intents and purposes, I've made up.
Well, it is that challenge. I mean, you do have complete control until the editor. Thank God for editors come along and just say, I'm very sorry, but this doesn't make any sense, or that's not true, or that's what I mean. They're absolutely, I mean, my editor, thank God, is a wonderful, top class professional, and is greatly helpful. But up to that point, pretty much, it's absolutely your baby, and remains so afterwards, because editors are there to help and improve and guide you through to tell the best possible story you can. So that's the next stage, which I always look forward to. I love actually getting the first manuscript done. That's wonderful, and getting it over to the editor and waiting for the response and the changes or the observations that she's made. And I find that process hugely exciting, because invariably it is a major contribution to the story, and at the end of it you have a much better book than the one you delivered to the editor.
It's a nervous time waiting for it to come back and hoping they're not just going to say, I wouldn't release this one if I were you, which is always the worry.
It is the first barrier, because then of course it goes to the publisher, in your case, to your beta readers. You have people who you trust who to read your books first of all, to give you comeback as well, which is another way of doing it. People who are
very small team of 3, but they're fantastic.
Yeah. Well, again, that's another interesting area, really. That I don't know how many writers actually have that. Whether I mean,
all people, they'll show their husband or their wife or maybe a friend or two. I mean, even any novel is not. It's not an entire solo project. I'm sure Amy reads yours, or various people might have a look at early drafts.
She's very supportive. She doesn't really want to get involved in the business of it earlier.
Yeah, she's got a real job to do.
She's got, I mean, but she's vital when it's getting into there's a first draft there. It's coming back from the editor. That's when she becomes my beta reader, and she says, right, boom, 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 boom. This is what I think, or whatever. So in that respect, it does become a collaboration, this lonely world of the writer, with blood, sweat and tears, pumping away at your keyboard. Actually, you hand it over to other people at some point. Now, of course, you still can say, well, I disagree with you, and I'm going to stick with that, and I disagree with that, and I'm going to stick with that. So you do have a fair amount of control over a writer about what goes out there. The next stage, of course, and this is the ultimate critic, is whether people read it and like it and buy it. Yeah. And that is the final thing. So
that's why we do it. We can't. If people don't buy it and they don't like it, then they're not going to buy the next one, and bills aren't going to get paid.
So stories. So why are we writing crime, Adam?
Because we're sick and twisted.
Yes. Yes, I suppose so.
I think that just about covers. I guess. I'm a man, and being very stereotypical, men tend to read crime books or things that have got that kind of exciting element to them, I suppose, which is bizarre, because the vast majority of my readers are female, 80-something%.
Well, and here too. I mean, there's it's most of the responses to the work come from women readers, and the perspective and whatever. I mean,
does that inform the way that you write future books, though?
Well,
do you kind of try and do it with a female mindset?
Well, definitely. Well, certainly, because my main protagonist is Tamara Sullivan, and that's when Amy's input is massively helpful. So it's a presumption to actually for me to actually have a hero that is a woman, and it has been levelled at me. And they say, how do you find writing female characters if you're not one? And I say, well, that's part of writing. You have to put yourself in someone else's mind.
Well, I'm not a serial killer either, but I write those.
Well, exactly. So I mean, obviously, you can make mistakes, and readers will be very quick to point those out, and for that, many thanks. But yes, it is wonderful spending many hours in the mindset of a female character, a strong woman character. Certainly, someone like Tamara, who I love, because I spent so much time in her company, and sort of telling the story and of her life, if that's not too sort of entering Sood's corner at 1,000 miles an hour. But you become very attached to your characters. I mean, do you find that? I certainly am very attached attached to Sullivan and Broderick.
Yeah, you do, and I'm kind of aware that, in at least one of my series, I need to do something to kind of. It's getting to that point now where 8 books in, something major. I mean, there have been major things that need to happen, but there are kind of different plot points and beats you need to hit on the way through your series without getting too technical about it. Yeah, I'm kind of aware that I've got to turn something upside down majorly.
Yes.
At some point, it's that time again. And
we link back now to The Bridge earlier. We're listening to the writers and producers. We're saying this is the fourth and the last, and that maybe they reached their point, as you've just said, where something majorly. Did you say majorly? Majorly,
probably.
Has to happen, and they, whatever that is, I'm sure we'll all be shocked when it comes to the final episode to find out what's going on. But you feel that with your characters, and so maybe that's...
you just get a sense as a writer. You can kind of feel it coming before the readers do. You can think actually something major needs to happen, and obviously that scares you, because that normally involves killing off a main character or changing the world permanently in some way. And of course it's that world and that series has become comfortable now for me, and I think that is where I get the sense that something needs to change, because as a writer you do not want to become comfortable. You do not want to feel comfortable. It needs to be kept exciting for you to write it as well as for the readers.
Well, that's interesting. Now, here's an example: Conan Doyle killing off his Sherlock Holmes.
Well, yeah,
the outrage.
Yeah.
So it's not, you may feel that as a writer, but your readers who have become attached to a character, and this happens very often, may actually just go, no, you can't possibly do that. That's why so many people do come back from the dead. Or a writer is sort of realises that they can come back and write other stories, or in some cases, I dare say, feel forced to do so by public outcry. But yes, I mean, I suppose he was the first to actually kill off. The killing of Sherlock Holmes was such a huge thing when it happened.
Well, the bringing back of Sherlock Holmes was enormously successful. I think I'm probably right in saying it's more successful after that than before. I think the killing him off was not a bad little publicity.
No,
actually.
Well, I'm sure it wasn't done for that reason, but I'm sure it has been done for those reasons by some people. But
it's worth a shot, isn't it? I'm one for a publicity stunt and for a marketing angle. So
what's the skill in which it's done? I mean, we all remember Dallas and dear old Bobby. He was abducted by aliens, was he? Probably.
Dirty Den on EastEnders who pushed in a canal and stayed underwater for 30 years before coming back up for air.
Yes, I mean that's holding your breath, isn't it?
It's not bad, yeah.
So anyway, well that's us, I guess. Really, for this week's podcast. Thank you for sticking with us, listeners, throughout the world.
If you have, we might be talking to ourselves.
We're not. I'm sure our Slovakian listeners are there. Australia, New Zealand,
one
Canada.
in Russia. I saw. I checked this morning. The stats. There's now one in
Russia. There we are. So, you see, Putin does have taste.
Yes. Good morning, Mr. Putin.
And
lovely Friday.
And Alaska, I think.
Yes.
So I hope the weather's as nice as it is in Bedfordshire for all our Alaska.
Feeling Alaska
listeners.
will probably be a little colder.
Yeah, I've got a feeling it might well be.
But no, thank you. It's been great fun. We haven't had a guest. We haven't had to do any booking in. We're I don't think I'm going to have to do any editing either, which is nice. We just open the microphones, talk for an hour, and then go.
Well, I've learnt a lot from you during this podcast. Thank you very much. Most of it I've enjoyed immensely, and it's a pleasure working with you, sir.
Yes, and you, and hopefully the listeners' appetites for wanting to know more about us has been sated. And we should probably say, if you want to buy our books, then please do. And we should probably also tell you, because we're contractually obliged to, that you should go and get them from Kobo.
Oh yes.
If you go to kobo.com and find heartily recommend Mr. Dawes' books, The Rock and the Poisoned Rock. Get hold of those on Kobo, and if you've not bought a Kobo book before, then you get 90% off by entering the promo code CRIME at the checkout.
Ooh.
And that's about it. We'll back to the normal format next week.
Back to the normal format. We've got a great show coming up next week. Who have we got? We have got
K.L. Slater, writer of psychological thrillers, getting on for 1 million books sold, and she's only been doing it for 3 years, which is
very much looking forward to talking to her. I mean, she has a great tale to tell of struggling through adversity to become a best-selling author.
And never giving up.
Never give up. Never give up. Never give up, as we've said many times before. But thanks for listening. Adam, I hope you have a nice week.
Thank you.
You're going away on a little holiday, aren't you?
Well, yes, a stag holiday. Yes, my best friend is getting married in July, and he, like me, is not one for kind of big city breaks and shots and all of this, and he's just decided he wants to take 3 friends on holiday for a few days. So
where you go? Not Sweden. If you do, don't take that bridge.
No, we're off to Corfu, not Kavos, but so it's a little holiday resort in Corfu.
I love Corfu. They play cricket. They've got a cricket ground in the middle of Corfu town, which I've played on. It's absolutely fantastic. It's one of my favourite places in the world, Corfu. Do you know exactly where you're going to?
I do, but I'm not going to say publicly.
You're not going to divulge, but
I've narrowed it down to an island. That's enough.
Well, I'm sure you will represent us in the finest possible way.
A few days on a sunbed and then into some bars to watch some football in the evening.
Yes. So it's a teetotal visit, is it, to Corfu?
Oh, no. Right. They'll be drinking. We just won't be doing shots in Kavos. We'll be in a nice little resort having a couple of cold beers. That'll do us nicely.
I think I look forward to seeing the pictures on Facebook. I think I do.
Well, I might show them next week, but I won't because this is a podcast.
Yes.
And we can describe the pictures. You can describe them in gory detail.
Well, yes, I've seen the ones of you doing the marathon, and well done. He did a marathon recently and raised £700 all on his own shelf.
I took part in the marathon. I ran a mile of it. 26 of us did a mile.
Yes, well, I saw you coming to the final furlong with that, and those pictures may well haunt me for the rest of my life.
Yes, well, we won't go into that.
Partners in Crime was presented by Adam Croft and Robert Dawes and produced by Adam Croft. The theme tune was by the Caesareans. The Partners in Crime logo and imagery were designed by Stuart Beisch. Partners in Crime is sponsored by Kobo, your favourite local bookshop, perfected.